Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. Today I have chosen the international edition of the Hindu because the Hindu doesn't publish the Delhi edition on the account of the Holi festival. So by looking at the international edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a comprehensive and detailed analysis. The idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from the initiative, do support us with your likes and comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. Tonight at 7 p.m., I will be taking a special session as part of Conquer Prelims 2025, where we are going to discuss all the PYQs from international relations. All the IR related questions that have appeared in previous prelims will be discussed in detail in a marathon session. So do ensure you join me live at 7 p.m. today. The link can be found on our YouTube channel. So please open the stream and you can click on notify me, set a reminder so that you can join the session live at 7 p.m. tonight. Then if you want the PDF of the current class, please join my Telegram channel by scanning the QR code. After the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So with this, let's get started and let's look at the first article. On the front page, we have an article related to India-Pakistan relations. I'm sure all of you are aware of the deadly attack that recently took place in Balochistan in Pakistan. A Baloch rebel group carried out one of the biggest attacks that has been seen in the Baloch region of Pakistan, where these militants, they managed to hijack a train, the Jafar Express, held hundreds of hostages, and this perpetuated one of the biggest security crises that Pakistan has faced in the region in recent times. And as always and as expected, Pakistan has tried to pin the blame on India. Since many years, Pakistan has been alleging that India sponsors the Baloch rebels, even though it has not provided a shred of evidence or proof. And even though India has consistently denied these claims, Pakistan has this habit of blaming India for all its problems, including its security problems. Despite there being no concrete evidence of any Indian involvement, Pakistan has once again tried to blame this attack on India by stating that the Baloch attackers who hijacked the train, they apparently had weapons of Afghan and Indian origin. And the Pakistani press release and the statements given out by the Pakistani security establishment clearly indicates that they are alleging that India was involved behind this attack. So let's dissect these claims of Pakistan. Of course, India has responded very strongly. India has not only rejected these unfounded claims of Pakistan, but India has also pointed out that Pakistan is the fountainhead of terrorism. Pakistan is the hub of terrorism, a terror factory of sorts, which has been involved in state sponsorship of terrorism. India has reiterated its stand that we don't have a policy of engaging with extremist terrorist forces, and we don't destabilize regions in other countries. So India has firmly stated this position and demanded evidence from Pakistan while denying all these allegations and rejecting the blame that Pakistan has tried to place on India. Now, I think it's very important to understand this issue in slight detail and go beyond this article. Because see, this attack which has happened, the train hijack, happens to be one of the biggest attacks that Pakistan has seen, especially with regard to the Baloch insurgency. So let's talk about the Baloch insurgency in slight detail. So first, let's look at the map. You need to understand the geography, the demography of Balochistan in order to get a hold of this important topic. See, the Baloch, they are a unique ethnic tribal group found across parts of Pakistan and Iran. The Baloch community can be found not only in the Balochistan province of Pakistan, they're also found in the neighboring region in Iran where we have the Sistan Balochistan province. The Baloch people are also found in southern Afghanistan over here. So the Baloch community, a unique ethnic tribal community, is distributed across 3 countries, from Iran to southern Afghanistan to Pakistan. The Balochistan province that you're seeing here in the map, this happens to be the largest province of Pakistan. In terms of area, it is the largest province amongst the 4 provinces present in Pakistan. The other provinces in Pakistan include Punjab, Sindh, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So compared to the other 3, Balochistan is the largest province, but it is also the least populated. The region has a very sparse population. Hardly around 3.6% of Pakistani population can be found in Balochistan province, which is the largest province of Pakistan. But this region is rich in resources. It's blessed with hydrocarbon reserves, both oil and gas reserves. It accounts for nearly 40% of the hydrocarbon reserves present in Pakistan and the overall oil and gas production that happens in Pakistan. Most of the oil and gas mines which are present here, they are either owned by Chinese companies or by Western oil companies. Balochistan region is also blessed with minerals. Precious minerals can be found over here. And this resource-rich region has always felt discriminated at the hands of the Pakistani state. The root of the Baloch problem goes back to the very inception of Pakistan. So we need to go back in history and understand as to what happened and why there is an insurgency in Balochistan. Because a similar trouble can be seen in Sistan Balochistan as well, in neighboring Iran. So let's understand this in slight detail quickly, and then we'll talk about the India connection, the India angle. Why Pakistan feels this urge to blame Baloch insurgency on India. Let's verify how true or false are these claims. See, in 1947, when the Indian subcontinent gained independence from colonial rule and was partitioned primarily on religious lines, the Baloch region at that point was a princely state. It was one amongst the 500 plus princely states that were left behind from British India. Now, if you look at the Baloch region, which was inhabited by the Baloch people, it was primarily comprised of 4 sub-regions. This included Kalat, the most prominent and dominant region within the Baloch region, the Kalat region, ruled by the Khan of Kalat, also known as the Khanate of Kalat. The other 3 regions present here were Karan, Las Bela, and Makran, the coastline, the Baloch coastline, which you can see. Now, this is another important aspect with regard to the geography of Balochistan. The Makran coastline that you see here faces the Arabian Sea, giving Pakistan access to the Indian Ocean, and strategic ports are present over here, including the Gwadar port, which has been built by China as part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Just 100 kilometers away in Sistan Balochistan in Iran, even there you have a strategic port, the Chabahar port, which has been built by India. Even today it's operated by an Indian company. So in the Baloch region spread across Pakistan and Iran, there are 2 strategic ports, Gwadar in the Balochistan region of Pakistan and Chabahar in the Sistan Balochistan region of Iran, built by China and India respectively. So this goes on to show the larger geopolitical competition which is also present in the region with regard to connectivity, trade routes, and resources. Now, coming back to the history of the Baloch movement, why did the Baloch people rebel against the Pakistani state? As I said, it goes back to the very inception of Pakistan. So in colonial India, the Baloch region was one of the princely states present on the peripheries of the Indian subcontinent, and it was made up of 4 sub-regions: Kalat, Karan, Las Bela, and Makran, with Kalat being the most dominant region. These four sub-regions of the Baloch people, they came together to form a confederacy, popularly referred to as the Confederacy of Kalat, also known as the Khanate of Kalat. So the other three small provinces, that is Karan, Lasbela, Makran, they entered into a subsidiary arrangement with the Khanate of Kalat. This was the arrangement that existed in the Baloch region, where different Balochi ethnic tribes from different sub-regions came together to form a confederacy, a Khanate of Kalat, which was the most dominant region, and the Khan of Kalat was the one who was in power, with the other three small regions, Karan, Lasbela and Makran, being subsidiaries to the larger confederacy. Now this confederacy of Kalat, or the Khanate of Kalat, had a treaty arrangement with the British. This goes back to 1800s. In the 1800s, British India had signed a treaty with the Khanate of Kalat, through which British rule had been established in the Baloch region, and in return, some Balochi rights had been recognized. In fact, under this treaty, there is a provision, Article number 3, through which the British recognized the independent rights of the Baloch people while establishing British supremacy and overall British rule and sovereignty over the region. This eventually paved the way for the Baloch people to raise their voice during independence, during the decolonization that happened in the Indian subcontinent, demanding their rights to be recognized, which was promised under this treaty, and the region to be set apart as an independent state. As you know, princely states in 1947, through the Indian Independence Act, they were given the choice either to join India or Pakistan or even choose to remain independent. The Khanate of Kalat at that point expressed a strong wish in 1947 to remain independent, to emerge as a new sovereign nation for the Baloch people. In fact, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founding leader of Pakistan, even agreed with the Khanate of Kalat and signed an agreement on August 11, 1947, recognizing the independence and sovereignty of the Baloch region. Pakistan had essentially accepted the independence of the Baloch region through an agreement worked out between Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the then leader of Pakistan, just a few days before Pakistani state was born. The Baloch region and its independence, as per the British treaties, were recognized, and Pakistan at that point had no problem in letting go of this region. The British, in a way, were also on board the idea of keeping Baloch as an independent territory. But as the Cold War rivalries emerged, as Soviet Union became a larger threat for Western powers, particularly for Western European powers, Britain felt that Soviet expansion could be a possible threat. Because don't forget, the Soviets in late 1940s had already expanded their influence towards Afghanistan, and they were trying to spread out the influence towards South Asia as well. Iran and Pakistan at that point had aligned with the West. Pakistan not only became a Western ally during the Cold War, it even signed the Baghdad Pact along with Iran, and they joined a military alliance called the CENTO, which many of you might have studied. So Iran, Pakistan at that point were allies, and both were Western aligned countries. So Britain started exerting pressure within few months after independence that Baloch region should not be allowed to remain independent, because they feared expansion of Soviet influence via Afghanistan or via the Arabian Sea could threaten Western interests. And Britain started pressurizing Pakistan to ensure that Baloch region remains within Pakistan and Pakistan gains back control over the Baloch region. So eventually, as Pakistan started pressurizing the Baloch region, there was strong resistance from the Khanate of Kalat. The Khan strongly opposed any integration of the region with Pakistan. And that is where there is a rumor which is present, a popular misconception, that apparently the Khan of Kalat reached out to India seeking a merger with India. But however, there is no substantial evidence to prove this claim. This largely remains a misconception, and you can even call it a fake news. But there is no historical evidence to prove that the Khanate of Kalat reached out to India seeking a merger with India. But however, also understand, India would have never sought the integration of the Baloch region because it was not geographically contiguous with India. You can clearly see in the map, the Sindh province of Pakistan is present between Gujarat and Rajasthan on the Indian side and the Baloch region on the other side. If at all India had to take such a position to push for the integration of Baloch region into India, that would have weakened our position with regard to Junagadh, Hyderabad, and even Kashmir. So India was mindful of all these developments at that point. So we had no wish at that point to even encourage the independence of Balochistan or push Balochistan to join India. Whatever you might have heard is largely unfounded. As I said, it's a very popular misconception because there is no substantial evidence to ever prove that the Khan of Kalat reached out to India. Though such rumors spread at that point, the rumors did spread. In fact, it was even aired by All India Radio. But there is no evidence to establish that a formal outreach was done by the Khan seeking a merger with India. But irrespective of that, Pakistan started pressurizing Balochistan, and later Jinnah handed over the negotiations to the Pakistani government, to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Then the Pakistani state, by 1948, not only pushed Balochistan to join the region, and eventually it went on to exert force by even threatening economic sanctions of sorts and a military blockade of the region. So with no other option left, and since the Khan was cornered from all the sides, eventually agreed to the merger of the Baloch region, which was seen as a forceful merger at that point. And later, those who were against the merger in the Baloch region, they would rebel against the Pakistani pressure, triggering the Baloch insurgency back in 1948-49. It was the first wave of rebellion that was seen in the Baloch region, following immediately the merger of Balochistan into Pakistan. And Pakistan crushed the rebellion with brutal force. The Pakistani army, along with its intelligence agency, the ISI, they would commit brutal atrocities against the Baloch people. Large-scale killings were carried out, forced disappearances, where the Baloch leaders would be kidnapped, tortured, killed. They would be made to disappear essentially. So large-scale human rights abuses were carried out in the forceful merger and annexation of Balochistan. Of course, the Khanate of Kalat signed the instrument of accession, but it was done largely under force, under pressure. But later, when the rebellion broke out after the merger, Pakistan used brutal military force to crush the rebellion. And since then, the Baloch people have one major complaint against Pakistan, which is that the Baloch people have been discriminated, targeted, and oppressed. See, this is very true with regard to the polity of Pakistan. If you look at the polity of Pakistan, it's primarily the Punjabi elite who are dominant. In fact, this was the root cause of the divide between West and East Pakistan, which eventually led to the subjugation and oppression of the Bengalis, that triggered the Bengali rebellion, which eventually led to the liberation of Bangladesh. The Punjabi elite, who are the dominant class in Pakistani politics within the Pakistani army, they have dominated over every other province. That's the reason why you find similar sentiments present in the Sindh region as well. There are Sindhi nationalist movements very present and active even today, trying to fight for liberation and independence from the control of Pakistan. So this opposition by the minority groups such as the Sindhis, the Balochis, is primarily a resistance against the Punjabi domination by the Punjabi elite. So this essentially is an ethnic conflict. Baloch people have alleged that the region has not seen any development, any progress, despite it being the largest province with maximum resources being present, despite it having access to the sea. Balochistan region, though it has got a lot of foreign investments, there are foreign companies operating here. The China-Pakistan economic corridor, which China is pushing as part of Belt and Road Initiative, has led to advanced infrastructure, including roads, railway lines, and strategic ports such as Gwadar. But still, the benefits have not reached the Baloch people. There is lack of education, healthcare. There is no governance present on the ground, and there is large-scale unemployment. In fact, even for the projects present here, usually outsiders are brought in. For, let's say, for manual labor, or even for engineers, technicians who are needed for all these projects in the Baloch region. It's usually Punjabis who are brought in from the Punjab region, whereas the Balochi people are left out. So this has been the long-standing complaint of the Baloch people, and we saw the resurgence of this rebellious movement in 1970s again. In 1970s, under the leadership of few Balochi leaders, such as Bugti and others, there was a major rebellion which led to the formation of Balochi insurgent groups, such as the Baloch National Army, the Baloch Liberation Army, as it is called, which is basically responsible for the recent train hijacking. Then you also have the Baloch Liberation Front. These have been the two major Baloch insurgent outfits, the Baloch Liberation Army, which has been the largest of the outfits, which has carried out many attacks against the Pakistani state, which is also responsible for the recent train hijacking. The Baloch Liberation Front as well. So in the 1970s, again, Pakistan crushed the movement. Throughout 1980s, there was large-scale human rights violations. In the name of tackling insurgency, Pakistani state forces, the army, the ISI, would commit brutal atrocities. They would essentially carry out targeted killings, assassinations, forced disappearances. It pushed many Baloch people and leaders away from the region, and they have been exiled to either West Asia or Europe. Understood? So this crisis re-emerged in early 2000 as well. In early 2000, there was a resurgence of Balochi insurgency, which Pakistan again crushed with brutal force. So of late, the Balochi groups have often targeted Chinese projects, Chinese workers, Chinese diplomats in order to exert pressure on Pakistan. So this is what primarily leads Pakistan to blame this on India. And also don't forget, India had a very significant diplomatic presence in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021. When Taliban was toppled in 2001, following the 9/11 attacks and the invasion of foreign forces led by US and NATO forces, Afghan civilian government was installed and India built very close relations with the then Afghan government. We made big investments in Afghanistan to regain our influence, to establish connectivity, to make use of the Chabahar port route, to link with Afghanistan and further possibly extend this into Central Asia region. India made around $3 billion worth of investments. So to manage these projects, India obviously expanded its diplomatic presence. Apart from the embassy in Kabul, we opened multiple consulates in Herat, in Kandahar, in Mazar-e-Sharif, in Jalalabad. So we had 4 consulates in Afghanistan apart from the embassy. And Pakistan started viewing this with suspicion. Pakistan believed that India was using the diplomatic premises of these consulates as a cover for our intelligence operations. Because India's intelligence agency, RAW, had very close relations with the then Afghan intelligence agency, the NDS, under the then Afghan civilian government. Both India and the Afghan civilian government saw Pakistan as a threat because of Pakistan's involvement with various terrorist groups. Pakistan was the one which had nurtured the Taliban, which was a threat for the Afghan civilian government and as well as for India. The various anti-India groups that Pakistan had nourished along the Af-Pak border, be it Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, and in many ways Al-Qaeda as well, was under the protection of the Pakistani deep state. So it was natural for India, Afghanistan to work together in the security domain, including in the domain of intelligence, to counter terrorism. But Pakistan saw this security and counter-terror cooperation with suspicion, and it would imagine on its own that India, Afghanistan were collaborating, that RAW and NDS were using India's diplomatic premises, the consulates present here, to fund the Balochi groups and other terror groups, including the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So Pakistan would blame this on India without any substantial proof, without any evidence. Now, there is another interesting angle present here. The Baloch rebellion seen here has often led to clashes between Iran and Pakistan as well. For example, last year, you might remember, I had covered this topic as well. Iran launched missiles and rockets into the Balochistan region to target a terror group known as Jaish al-Adl. Iran alleges that Jaish al-Adl is a Balochi group, a Sunni Balochi outfit, targeting Iran because this group has been fighting for liberating the Sistan Balochistan region in Iran. Iran alleges that Pakistan sponsors Jaish al-Adl, and there is evidence to indicate ISI's links and involvement with Jaish al-Adl, which apparently is sheltered in the Balochistan region of Pakistan. So after Iran carried out this attack, Pakistan retaliated. Pakistan launched attacks into Sistan Balochistan, conducted airstrikes, alleging that Iran was supporting the Baloch Liberation Army and the Baloch Liberation Front, which are sheltered in neighboring Iran in the Sistan Balochistan province. So why does this happen? How come there are different Balochi groups one targeting Iran and one targeting Pakistan, and both are alleging that the other side is sponsoring them. This goes all the way back to 1979, the Iranian Revolution, when Iran was basically taken over by the Shia radical conservative clerics, and Iran turned into a Shia theocracy under the supreme leader, Ayatollah al-Khomeini. Iran turned anti-West, calling death to Israel, death to United States, and it broke from the Western alliance. So since then, Iran, Pakistan have had their issues, because don't forget, Pakistan is a Sunni majority state, whereas Iran remains a Shia power. The Baloch people, if you want to know, the Balochis are primarily Sunnis. So the conflict between the Balochi people and Pakistani state is not about religion. Both of them belong to the same religion, the same sect. Both follow Sunni Islam. This is primarily an ethnic conflict. The Balochi people oppose Pakistani control and domination by the Punjabi elite primarily on ethnic lines, not on religious lines or sectarian lines. So Iran, post 1979, saw Pakistan itself as a threat, the Sunni Balochi groups as a threat. And it's been alleged that Iran started cultivating some of the Balochi groups as a leverage against Pakistan. And Pakistan countered this by cultivating few anti-Iranian Balochi groups, such as Jaish al-Adl. So this has been a long-standing issue between Iran and Pakistan. Now, where does the India angle come in? And how true are these claims? See, any country which focuses on its security would obviously look at the security developments in its neighborhood. It would keep a check on the divides present in another country, maybe even remain in touch, in contact with some of the rebel forces as well. But to allege that you are sponsoring terrorism, that's a different accusation altogether. See, historically, there are few records available to show that India has maintained contacts with Baloch rebels. There is no doubt about it. Now, how do we know this? Let's say, for example, if you look at popular books such as The Cowboys of Raw, written by B. Raman, a former Raw officer, he points out that India did maintain contacts with Baloch leaders right from 1970s. It can even go back to 1950s as well. And till early 2000, India has always maintained contact with the Baloch leaders. In fact, the Baloch leaders who were exiled to Europe, they have been receiving some support to an extent from India, not officially, of course, through covert methods, not to engage in terrorism, but just to maintain contact with the Baloch groups. Given that Pakistan is India's biggest security threat, India would definitely have an interest to monitor the divisions in Pakistan and possibly leverage it, if not sponsor terrorism, at least to maintain contacts and to ensure that our interests will be protected eventually. So there is some evidence to show that India did have contacts with Baloch groups. In fact, we did remain in touch with Balochi leaders in Europe, in West Asia as well. But to allege that India has been sponsoring terrorism, that's a different accusation completely. See, India, at least as of what we know publicly, has not been involved in this policy of sponsoring terrorism, at least not in recent times. So we need to go by what the government says. Of course, there was a time in 1980s where India-Pakistan engaged in tit-for-tat covert war, but that was primarily with regard to the Khalistan movement. When Pakistan was actively sponsoring Khalistan movement against India, RAW did engage in covert operations aimed at hitting Pakistan by engaging in tit-for-tat attacks in Pakistani territory. But that was a different issue altogether. But there isn't substantial evidence to indicate any kind of Indian involvement in sponsoring the violence in Balochistan. But of course, India did slip up once in 2009 at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit. Then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and his government made a huge blunder when India and Pakistan were negotiating for the first time after 26/11 attacks, where India had cornered Pakistan. India had completely turned the world attention towards Pakistan through course of diplomacy, since we had enough evidence to indicate Pakistani involvement in the Mumbai attacks. The Manmohan Singh government had did a fine job of bringing international pressure on Pakistan and projecting Pakistan as a sponsor of terror. But at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit in Egypt, following the interaction between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and then Pakistani Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani, a joint statement was issued where it appeared as if India was accepting its role in Balochistan and it was willing to look at Pakistani accusations that India was sponsoring the terrorism in Balochistan. This was a huge diplomatic blunder. Though the joint statement added later that India had nothing to hide, that India was willing to consider any Pakistani concerns in return if Pakistan considers India's concerns. The drafting of the statement went wrong and it ended up being a huge diplomatic blunder from the Manmohan Singh government, which essentially gave fuel to Pakistan to keep blaming India. Just because we formally accepted that we'll look into Pakistani concerns, the statement said that India will look into Pakistani concerns on Balochistan. That was seen as a acceptance by India that India is possibly involved in sponsoring Baloch terrorism. Though there is no substantial evidence to indicate that, this diplomatic blunder which happened, it in a way added fuel to Pakistan's campaign against India. Now, this campaign has received much more support since 2016 because Prime Minister Modi made a very controversial reference during his Independence Day speech. While delivering the Independence Day speech at Red Fort, PM Modi alleged or even in a way sent out a threat to Pakistan that if Pakistan meddles in Kashmir, because at that point in 2015, Kashmir violence and unrest had gone up with Pakistani support and sponsorship. So given the deteriorating situation in Kashmir and the increasing attacks and unrest in Kashmir, Prime Minister Modi made a very controversial statement saying that if Pakistan meddles in Kashmir, then we will not hesitate from meddling in Balochistan. Now, this blunder again added more fuel to Pakistani allegations, and every time Pakistan would conveniently blame any Balochi attack against on India, alleging that India was involved in sponsoring them. This again, of course, has to be seen in the context of the arrest of Kulbhushan Jadhav as well, Indian national, a former Indian Navy commander, who Pakistan has alleged was a raw operative, allegedly who was sponsoring and supporting the Balochi groups in Balochistan. So if you look at the available evidence on record, officially or at least substantially, there's no evidence to indicate any Indian involvement or Indian sponsorship of Balochi insurgency. Though we might have maintained contacts because any intelligence agency worth its salt would maintain contacts with different groups in other countries. RAW would have done the same, but to allege that we have sponsored terrorism is a different game altogether. See, India should neither get involved in this because that essentially would equate India with Pakistan. Today, Pakistan is seen as a state sponsor of terrorism. India has successfully campaigned diplomatically, brought pressure on Pakistan by pointing out that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism, a rogue country. Now, we don't want to be equated with Pakistan. India shouldn't fall into that same bracket, although it's so very tempting to raise the Baloch issue and to make statements that will meddle in Balochistan as well. Though it's very tempting to do that. Ideally, India should avoid that because in the long run, India doesn't stand to benefit from that. Eventually, if your involvement is established, it will essentially equate India, Pakistan, places on the same footing, and India would be blamed as a state sponsor of terrorism as well. So we've had some bitter experiences in this regard. If you look at India's alleged involvement in Sri Lanka, in sponsoring the LTTE and how it backfired on India. So by and large, we have stayed away from such policies, at least from 1990s onwards. And whatever Pakistan is alleging is largely without proof, without evidence. Though India might have contacts, as I'm telling you, but to allege that we have sponsored terrorism is a completely different game altogether. So India has rightfully rejected these allegations, pointed fingers back at Pakistan, stating Pakistan is the one which is sponsoring terrorism, not India. Though we sympathize with the Baloch people as they have been discriminated and oppressed for decades, we don't have a policy of supporting extremist violence, and that has been India's formal stand and official position. So this is where I would like to leave the topic. So please take up this practice question, use it for your answer writing practice. Now let's move on and let's look at another important article from our neighborhood. Since it's the international edition, we have some very important, interesting articles from international relations. So this article is related to Nepal. What's happening in Nepal? See, Nepal has gone through long periods of political instability, especially in the last few years. So recently, there is a new development, a very shocking development in Nepal, which concerns India. Just last week, former king of Nepal, Gyanendra, made a big comeback and held a huge rally where around 10 to 15,000 people attended the rally, supported Gyanendra, to restore monarchy in Nepal. A pro-monarchy rally was held with quite a large support from around 10 to 15,000 people who attended the rally, calling for the restoration of monarchy, to reinstall Gyanendra as the king of Nepal and to bring back Nepal into a monarchy form of a political setup, probably with the restoration of its theological status as a Hindu state. I hope you know, at one point Nepal was the only Hindu state in the world, a theological state under the monarchy of the Rana dynasty. So what is this? What is the political status of Nepal? What is this transition that it has seen? Why are there pro-monarchy protests? So that is something you need to understand. So what is the current status of Nepal and what was it before? And why are these sentiments being seen? How does it affect India? So that is something we'll learn quickly. See, Nepal, the kingdom of Nepal, has been ruled by the Rana dynasty, the Rana clan, which has been in power from many centuries. They had an arrangement with the British following their defeat with the Anglo-Nepal wars. They had signed the Treaty of Sugoli, through which the boundaries of British India and Nepal was established. So the kingdom of Nepal remained an independent kingdom, acted as a buffer for British India. And eventually, after independence, after the British left the Indian subcontinent, obviously Nepal remained as a kingdom, as a monarchy and a theological state, a Hindu state. It was essentially a Hindu monarchy. In 1951, the then king of Nepal, Tribhuvan, visited India, which had become an independent democratic republic state, adopted a constitution as well. Visited India, and Tribhuvan was someone who enjoyed very close ties with Prime Minister Nehru. And after being influenced by Nehru and India's evolution into a democracy, Tribhuvan went back to Nepal and declared that Nepal will also transition into a democratic state. That's why the Kathmandu airport is named after Tribhuvan, the Tribhuvan International Airport, the then king, who transitioned Nepal into a democracy in 1951. But this experiment in Nepal was very short-lived. In 1960, his son, Mahendra, the next king, Mahendra, he abolished the transition to democracy and he returned the country into a unitary setup, a unitary form of government, by establishing the panchayat system of governance with the king as the supreme authority. So Nepal would remain a Hindu state with the monarch at the top. It was not a republic state. It was not a democracy, essentially. There was no multi-party democracy allowed, though Tribhuvan had made that attempt to introduce multi-party democracy in elections. His son Mahendra would erase all these gains and revert the country back towards authoritarian tendencies. He would establish a unitary form of government with centralized authority and control in the hands of the king, with a panchayat system installed at the ground level for local governance. So from 1960 to 1990, Nepal remained under this setup, a sort of a monarchy with a panchayat-based local governance, and it would remain a theological state, a Hindu state, and a monarchy. Now, during this period, India and Nepal actually enjoyed very good relations initially. In 1950s, 60s, India and Nepal had very good ties because Prime Minister Nehru had very good relations with the Rana dynasty, with the elite royals, and India was the primary supplier of all essential items and assistance. We gave a lot of funds. In fact, Indian military was deployed in Nepal to give them training. We were jointly guarding Nepal's borders with China, because at that point in 1951, Nepal was scared, Nepal was threatened when China annexed Tibet in 1950. In fact, all the Himalayan kingdoms, from Nepal to Sikkim to Bhutan, all of them were threatened, they felt scared when China annexed Tibet in 1950. India, in a way, gave security to all these Himalayan kingdoms, and we signed the Treaty of Peace and Friendship in 1950, which cemented the relationship between India and Nepal. India would provide military support, weapons, military training. At one point, Indian troops were stationed in Nepal as well. We would establish essential infrastructure, provide funds for basic infrastructure creation. All essential supplies would go from India to Nepal. Under the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, we kept open borders, abolished border controls, provided for free movement to promote our cultural ties and economic ties. Nepalis were given national treatment as per the treaty that we signed with reciprocal arrangement from Nepal for Indian citizens. Such a close bond was built, and India and Nepal were on the same page, and we both saw China as the threat, China as the aggressive threat, and India had basically cultivated Nepal as a buffer, as a security buffer. Just like the British cultivated all the Himalayan kingdoms as a buffer to shield their colony, India continued this policy mainly to shield itself against the aggressive behavior of China. But in 1970s, a fracture developed in this relationship. When Sikkim merged with India in 1975, it was alleged that India had covertly interfered in the Chogyal dynasty to create internal political trouble, which had forced Sikkim to merge with India, which until then was just a protectorate state of India. I hope you know that Sikkim was an independent sovereign monarchy at that point and was a protectorate state of India. But following the crisis in the Chogyal kingdom, in 1975, Sikkim would merge with India with allegations that India's RAW had interfered with the kingdom of Sikkim, destabilized the Chogyal dynasty, forcing its merger with India. Though India would deny these allegations, Nepal would believe this. Nepal's king, the monarchy, would feel threatened because if India could do this with Sikkim, right, India might do this with Nepal as well tomorrow. So this made the king of Nepal, the royals, more cautious about dealing with India, and Nepal would start playing the China card. It would deliberately get closer to China, especially from 1970s onwards. It would play India versus China. It would get some benefits from China as well to just keep India on the back foot, and it would get closer to India as well to keep China on the back foot. So Nepal started doing this quite regularly, leading to a friction in India-Nepal relations in the 70s and 80s. It was only in 1990 that multi-party democracy was restored. Multi-party democracy was restored after the protests by the Madhesis, who blocked the roads between India and Nepal. In 1989, the Madhes people, who are linked with India very closely, the Madhes people are found in the Terai region, in the plains of Nepal, in the southern parts. They marry into families on the Indian side in UP and Bihar. So very close familial marital relations exist between the Madhes community in the Terai belt and the villages, border villages of UP and Bihar. So Madhes people have often felt discriminated by the Pahadis, by the elites who are closer to the royals. So Madhesis have always demanded equal rights, equal treatment, and since they are connected to India, India has always raised the voice of the Madhesis as well. So in 1989, Madhesis led a blockade, and this blockade cut off Nepal's economy from India. Given how Nepal was dependent on India, its GDP crashed, essential supplies were affected, inflation took off, leading to rising unpopularity against the king. Eventually, this economic pressure, though India denies any involvement here, India says this was an organic protest by the Madhesis. India had nothing to do with it. Though we do support the Madhesi cause, India denied any involvement in the blockade, and Madhesi groups were doing it on their own. And in 1990, this pressure, the rising sentiments against the king, led to the introduction of multi-party democracy, and Nepal was again back to being a constitutional monarchy. Meaning there would be multi-party democracy, elections, and there would be an elected government in place, a parliament. Eventually, the figurehead would be the monarch, the king. So during this time, left-wing extremism was rising as well in Nepal. Maoism. The Communist Party of Nepal triggered a civil war in the country from 1995, which lasted a decade until 2005. So Nepal went through a brutal civil war triggered by the Maoists, a left-wing extremist organization, and this consumed the country. Violence, instability became the norm. Then during the same period in 2001, a major disaster hit the royal family itself. The then king, the queen, and many members of the royal family were massacred, allegedly by one of the family members, the crown prince. I'm sure many of you would be familiar with the royal massacre that occurred in Nepal. Within the palace, the Crown Prince Dipendra allegedly went on a killing spree, a shooting spree, killing the king, the queen, and many other members of the royal family, leading to a complete massacre of the royal family itself. Following this, in 2002, Gyanendra came to power. The one who was massacred, the then king, was the brother of Gyanendra. Birendra was the one in power at that point. So King Birendra, his family was wiped out by the crown prince, which led to the coronation of Gyanendra as the king in 2002, who recently has led the pro-monarchy protest. From 2002 to 2005, Gyanendra would be heading the constitutional monarchy, and I'm sure you know that in a constitutional monarchy, the king doesn't have the real authority. The king is a figurative head. There is a constitution in place, there is multi-party democracy, there are elections which are supposed to be held, a government which is formed, but the monarch remains a figurehead. And of course, Gyanendra was not happy with this. He was someone who was power hungry. In 2005, Gyanendra did the unthinkable. Even while the country was going through a civil war, he abolished the constitution, he abolished the parliament, and he basically disbanded the government itself. Used the army to carry out a coup and establish supreme authority of the monarchy. So Nepal was regressing. Gyanendra brought back an authoritarian sort of rule by restoring complete monarchy in 2005, abolishing the government itself and using the army to do his bidding, to oppress the people and violate human rights. This was at a time when the country was already consumed by a civil war triggered by the Nepali Maoists. So things were deteriorating in our neighborhood, and things were looking very bad for India, because from 1970s till 2005, India was losing influence. We were witnessing the rising Chinese influence, which was seen as a big threat by India. So India would actively intervene in this crisis, especially with regard to the civil war. India would act as a mediator between the Maoists and the Nepali government and the army. Through India's negotiation, the 12-point peace agreement was worked out, which brought the civil war to an end. The civil war ended and the Maoists were brought into the mainstream. The Maoists were integrated into Nepali politics, into Nepali army. Normalcy came back into the country, and eventually Gyanendra would face tremendous pressure from his own people. Given his authoritarian rule and the restoration of complete monarchy, in 2005-2006, people had rebelled against these trends, and this had pushed Gyanendra out of power. Gyanendra was pushed out by the people. Parallelly, India had negotiated a peaceful end to the civil war which was going on. So from 2006 to 2008, Nepal went through a transition phase. From being affected by a civil war led by the Maoists and by being threatened by authoritarian monarchy rule, with the help of India, Nepal transitioned into a complete constitutional democracy. It abandoned its theological nature, became a secular state, and transitioned into a constitutional republic, a federal, secular, democratic republic. So this was a very welcome change, as it would restore democracy in the country, and India had played a pivotal role in this. Eventually, Nepal would draft its own constitution. The Constituent Assembly from 2008 to 2015 would negotiate over the terms of the constitution. A constitution was finally adopted in 2015. But the problem is, political parties and politicians in Nepal have always been concerned about their own interests. They have been power hungry, be it the Nepali Congress, which has been a major party, be it the Communist Party of Nepal under Prachanda, which at one point was leading the Maoist insurgency, or be it the other communist parties, including the unified Marxist-Leninist parties. All these major parties have been power hungry, and they have been basically playing a power game. And over the last 2 decades, Nepal has seen multiple changes in government and leadership. Number of governments have come and gone. Believe it or not, in the last 17 years, Nepal has had more than 12 governments. In the last 7 years, since the new constitution, since the elections were held in 2016, so it's around 8 to 9 years, Nepal has had more than half a dozen governments and half a dozen change in leadership. So this has led to complete chaos and crisis, and obviously you can imagine the status of development in the country. I wanted to give this entire background so you can understand why the current pro-monarchy rally is very significant and important. People of Nepal are frustrated. They are not able to access the benefits of development. There is no development happening in Nepal. They are struggling for education opportunities, livelihood opportunities. They are moving to other countries, India and other countries, to seek out better opportunities. And Nepali people are frustrated. It is this frustration that the pro-monarchists are trying to exploit now. There is anger in general against Nepal's politics. There is anger against all the political parties, the leaders, as they have failed to stabilize the country and bring development. So this resentment of the people, the anti-incumbency, which we can call it as anti-incumbency, this in a way is paving the way for pro-monarchy sentiments again, at least amongst a section of Nepalis who are still loyal to the royal family. So this is what leads us to the current development where Gyanendra has come back after a long time, and he's having some support from the pro-monarchists who are calling for the restoration of monarchy. They want to take Nepal back. They want to abolish the constitution, the democracy, abandon the secular nature of the country and take it back to being a theological state and bring it back under a monarchy. So this regression, political, social regression, would have implications for India. There are whispers of alleged Indian involvement in this as well, as posters of UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath has come up at these pro-monarchy rallies, and controversial statements have been made by few Indian leaders regarding India enabling the formation of a so-called Hindu state. So this could have deeper implications for India's foreign policy interests, because one problem we have faced in Nepal has always been the allegation of excessive interference. Since 1960s, India has been alleged to have been excessively involved in Nepal's politics, and this has contributed to anti-India sentiments, which in a way has enabled China. So this is where India should play it very safe. We should not be interfering directly in the politics of Nepal, and of course we should be siding with the pro-democracy elements. Though democracy is dysfunctional in Nepal, that is the best bet for India. Backing the pro-monarchy elements and Gyanendra would be a disaster, because that would lead to the regression of the country, and that would set a wrong example, a wrong precedent. So let's see how things will develop. It's still a developing story. So I just wanted to give you this update regarding these shocking developments from Nepal, where a lot of people are coming out. But of course, it doesn't represent majority support. 10-15,000 people don't represent the majority. But at least the traction which pro-monarchy revivalists are gaining is something that India should take note of. And India should keep its hands off and ensure that we support and strengthen the democracy in the country, and not appear to be involved with those who are trying to regress Nepal back towards a monarchy. Now let's look at another article, again from International Relations. Sorry, I can't help it because we have taken up the international edition. So in this article, M.K. Narayanan, former National Security Advisor, former Director of IB, former Governor of West Bengal, writes an article about summit-level diplomacy. See, I'll make it very quick and simple. I just want you guys to understand what is summit-level diplomacy, when did it start, what is its relevance, and today, in today's world of geopolitics, is summit-level diplomacy still relevant? That is what we need to understand, because it's a very important concept. UPSC might ask you a mains question regarding summit-level diplomacy. Is it relevant? Is it useful? When I say summit-level diplomacy, what does it mean? It basically means when the leaders of a country, the head of states, head of governments, when they meet directly, when they interact to take forward the relations between two countries or two or more countries. That is what we mean by summit-level diplomacy. When the head of state or head of government, the prime ministers, the presidents, when they meet to take forward the diplomatic relations between two countries, that is what we call as summit-level diplomacy. For example, recently Prime Minister Modi visited United States, met with US President Donald Trump, held a direct interaction, discussed key issues, signed agreements, launched new initiatives. That is an example of summit-level diplomacy. Similarly, Prime Minister Modi will attend India-ASEAN summit, where the Indian leader will interact with all the 10 ASEAN leaders So all the head of states, head of governments are coming together from India and Southeast Asian countries. So that is an example of summit level diplomacy. It can be bilateral, it can be multilateral as well. So when did this start? Summit level diplomacy goes all the way back to 1814, 1815, when the Congress of Vienna was organized to reshape the map of Europe following the Napoleonic Wars. This can be a prelims fact for you. Summit level diplomacy owes its origin to the Congress of Vienna, where European leaders for the first time came together to negotiate and discuss together following the Napoleonic Wars to reshape the boundaries, the map of Europe. Since then, summit level diplomacy has gained more traction during the World War era, post-World War, during Cold War period, and of course today as well. Summit level diplomacy has become more important, where leaders come together to discuss issues, iron out differences, and work out cooperation between them. But how relevant is it? How impactful is it? Does it really lead to any outcomes? Is it positive or is it negative? That's what we need to understand. See, summit level diplomacy has worked many times. It has given very good results, because when the highest level of leadership get together and work together, they can easily keep aside the differences, and if both sides work towards a common approach, they can actually achieve miraculous developments. Take, for example, the Camp David Accords of 1978, where the US acted as a mediator between Israel and Egypt and established peace between Israel and Egypt. So this was a positive outcome of summit level diplomacy, where the leaders of US, Israel, Egypt worked together directly through summit level interaction and worked out the Camp David Accords. Like this, we have many examples. Look at the India Central Asia Summit, India ASEAN Summit. These summit level interactions are very useful, as it brings more weight to these interactions. Take, for example, groupings like BIMSTEC, which has been led by the leaders. The summit level interaction at BIMSTEC has been immensely beneficial. The Quad initiative is another example of summit level diplomacy. So at all these groupings, at all these platforms, even the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the BRICS Summit, or G20 Summit for that matter. So at all these groupings, multilateral platforms and organizations, summit level interaction has been immensely beneficial, because it can basically keep aside the diplomats, the ministers, and bring the head of states and governments together, the leaders, who can easily iron out differences and work out a collaboration between different countries. So this brings more stability, it brings a better balance in the world of international relations. However, there is a downside to it. There is a negative side, there is a risk with summit level diplomacy. What is the risk? Most times, summit level diplomacy is superficial. It is largely organized, orchestrated. It's more of a PR event. In many cases, summit level diplomacy becomes a PR event, a photo op, a photo opportunity, where leaders come together, shake hands, they hug each other, and it's basically a posture they're sending out in front of the media, in front of the world, while nothing concrete is achieved. There might be some discussion, they might agree on something, disagree on something, but eventually there are no outcomes in summit level diplomacy. Sometimes it can turn bad as well. Take, for example, the recent spat between Trump and Zelensky. It was a summit level interaction between Trump and Zelensky, and look at how it turned out. Zelensky raised issues outside of what was supposed to be discussed. Trump and his VP retaliated and humiliated Zelensky publicly, resulting in a public showdown with nothing concrete being achieved out of it. So in many instances, summit level diplomacy may not yield any concrete results or any tangible outcomes. This especially happens when the leaders are not adequately prepared. When there is no preparation on the part of the leaders to anticipate, to address each other's mutual concerns, and when there is no civility shown by the leaders themselves, that too when they're interacting in public, that's when these summit level interactions will fail completely. We have seen summit level interaction between India and Pakistan. Take for example the Agra summit, when Prime Minister Vajpayee gracefully hosted Pakistani leader Pervez Musharraf. But eventually the summit was a failure. We couldn't come out with any concrete achievement, right? So summit level diplomacy will fail many times because it's largely a superficial event, very well controlled, orchestrated as per protocols. Almost everything is predetermined as to what will be discussed, what will be signed, except for the Trump-Zelensky spat which happened, right, where they went out of script. Usually, leaders will stick to the script and it's largely an orchestrated event with no concrete outcomes at the end of it. But however, the writer praises Prime Minister Modi recently, how Prime Minister Modi went well prepared when he met Donald Trump and ensured that the summit level interaction brought some positive outcomes. Because India has managed to get some respite at least with regard to the tariffs that Trump has been threatening with. Though India will be hit with some tariffs in some areas of our trade, India might be given an exception and we are going to negotiate a trade deal. And that shows some kind of positive outcome of the summit level interaction. The new initiatives in the defense domain, the very fact that US is offering its most advanced fighter jet to India, the F-35, could be seen as a successful outcome of the summit level interaction. Then the close defense collaboration in research and development in defense technologies is another huge achievement, which is seen as an outcome of summit level interaction. So summit level diplomacy can go either ways. It can be a big success. It can lead to breakthrough developments in geopolitics, or it can lead to collapse of relations as well. It's all about how it is managed. It's all about how the leaders are prepared. Can they follow established diplomatic norms? Can they understand each other's concerns, be respectful towards each other? They might have disagreements, but can they overcome those disagreements and come out with something which is concrete and positive? So summit level diplomacy has not lost its relevance. It still remains significant today because the highest level interaction is always useful and essential, sometimes to resolve complex issues. So that is what you need to understand about summit level diplomacy. Next, we have an article on page 6, a column, which is related to the rights of linguistic minorities. I'm sure you're aware of a fundamental right which is guaranteed to linguistic minorities in the country. What is this fundamental right? Under Article 29 of the Indian Constitution, a fundamental right is guaranteed to minorities, both religious minorities and linguistic minorities. So minorities have a right, especially linguistic minorities have a fundamental right to protect their language, their scripts and scriptures, and the associated culture. Because as we have discussed in many sessions, language is part of one's identity, cultural identity. So minority linguistic communities, they have this fundamental right under Article 29 to protect their language, their scripts, their scripture, their culture, which is associated with it. And under Article 350 Clause A, the government is mandated to provide opportunities for minorities and their children to learn in their mother tongue, to ensure that learning material, medium of instruction is made available for linguistic minorities, to ensure that their children can access education in their own mother tongue. This is again a constitutional requirement where the state is directed under Article 350 Clause A to enable such resources for linguistic minorities so that their children can learn in their own mother tongue. So there are few minority linguistic institutions in the country, and recently there has been one concerning development in Maharashtra. In the Gadchiroli district, a very backward region in Maharashtra, facing many problems with regard to development. In Gadchiroli, you have a tribal community, the Gond community, which speaks the Gondi language. The Gondi community can be found in many other parts of India as well, across Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha as well. They're spread out across 6 different states, and their population is roughly around 2.9 million. There are around 29 lakh Gondi speakers, which is a minority language. Please understand, it's not recognized under the 8th schedule. It's not one of the official languages under the 8th schedule. So clearly it's a minority language. So there are few schools in the tribal belts, in the tribal belt of the Gond region, where the Gond people can be found, to promote learning opportunities in Gondi medium. So in Maharashtra, the Maharashtra government has taken a controversial decision. Recently in Gadchiroli, one of the Gondi medium schools, which was the last remaining Gondi medium school in Maharashtra, has been closed by the government. It has been shut. Why? Why did the government close the school? Because according to the government, especially the local authorities, this Gondi medium school was not following the procedures. On bureaucratic procedural grounds, the school itself has been shut, which was serving the children of the Gond tribal community, helping them learn in their mother tongue, the Gondi language. Just because it was not registered under the RTE, Right to Education Act 2009, the authorities have alleged that they couldn't monitor the school and establish the standards of learning. And since it is not in accordance with the provisions of Right to Education Act, the government has decided to close the school itself, which is a big disservice to the tribal community. It could affect the tribal culture and identity, and it could even lead to the very destruction of such minority languages. Now, the writer offers a comparison. On one hand, the government promotes one of India's ancient languages, Sanskrit. Though it is spoken hardly by 25,000 speakers, it is recognized as one of the 8 scheduled languages, one of the official languages, given sufficient funding, whereas many other minority languages are being lost out. And the writer is highlighting the difference between the Jan Bhasha and the Dev Bhasha. While Sanskrit is often referred to as the Dev Bhasha, the language of the gods, the language of the people, the language spoken by the people in their day-to-day life, such as Gondi, is being ignored and neglected. So this brings up a very important issue. When it comes to tribal welfare, when it comes to protecting these minority languages, what should the government do? Should the government encourage more such schools? Because here we are seeing a case where the government is shutting down these schools, which in fact goes against the principles of Article 29 and Article 350 Clause A. So that is the debate the writer is trying to bring out. He says that the closure of this school must be called out because this weakens tribal welfare, tribal rights. It goes against linguistic minority rights. Now, let me know what you think in the comments. Should the state promote just a few languages, or should we promote the diversity that we have in our country? Next, we have another interesting and important article on page number 12 concerning Syria's new constitution. We'll just have a quick discussion on this. You just need an update regarding what's happening in Syria. As you all know, Syria has recently gone through a major crisis. The Syrian regime under Bashar al-Assad has been toppled by various rebel forces, including a radical fundamentalist group known as HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was headed by al-Julani, a noted terrorist who was at one point aligned with Al-Qaeda, briefly aligned with Islamic State, and later went on to found his own organization, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which toppled Bashar al-Assad's regime. So Assad's dictatorship of several decades, the Assad family had ruled Syria for several decades from 1970s. It was eventually toppled with this rebellion, where HTS was supported by other rebels in Syria with the backing of Turkey or Turkey. That is something we have studied in previous sessions as well. Now, there is an interim government which is in place in Syria. Al-Julani, the leader of HTS, who has been the pivotal figure, a so-called transitional leader of sorts, he had promised a safe and peaceful transition into a democracy where minority rights would be guaranteed and protected, where basic democratic principles would be honored. But the new constitution which has been adopted has no such provision, no such feature. Instead, the new Syrian constitution provides for an authoritarian Islamic regime. The new constitution declares Syria as an Islamic state, with Islam being the official religion, the sole official religion of the state, and the Arabic language being the sole language of the Syrian state. So that itself goes against the principle of democracy, which means minority religions, minority linguistic groups, minority ethnic groups, their rights may not be protected. And Al-Julani gets appointed as the interim president, of the country with enormous concentration of powers in his hands. An authoritarian president is being created with a presidential style of regime with no parliamentary checks and balances and accountability. Believe it or not, the president will now have the power to appoint the judges, and the constitution claims that the judiciary will be independent. How can the judiciary be independent if the president will decide as to who will be appointed to the constitutional courts? The appointment of judges to constitutional courts will be decided by the president, by the interim president. So that is a clear violation of independence of judiciary, though the constitution claims the judiciary is going to be independent. Even the parliament will essentially be decided by the president. 1/3 of the members of the future assembly will be nominated by the president himself. And they will form a select committee which will decide the electoral college to elect the remaining parliamentarians. So there won't be free and fair elections. There won't be universal adult franchise. This is very clear. The president will basically fill the assembly with his own followers and loyalists, who in turn will form an electoral college to elect some parliamentarians who obviously will be loyal to the president. So clearly, Syria is basically transitioning into an authoritarian state, into a presidential sort of regime with authoritarian control under one single leader. So that is the development that you need to keep in mind. Now let's look at the prelim section. We have some interesting articles today. This article on page 5 is related to the tourism sector. It talks about a government scheme which is called Swadesh Darshan scheme. The Swadesh Darshan scheme, implemented by the Ministry of Tourism, it's being implemented since 2014-2015. Now we are seeing the second edition. Swadesh Darshan scheme 2.0 is being implemented by the government of India. The idea is to promote tourism in the country, not just domestic, but even attract international tourists by creating better infrastructure, facilities, amenities at our tourist destinations. So as part of this renewed initiative, the center has sanctioned 116 new tourist spots across the country. So within the Swadesh Darshan scheme, there are different components which you need to understand. See, under Swadesh Darshan scheme, the center provides assistance to state governments to create essential tourist infrastructure. Those tourist sites which are listed under the scheme, they will be developed by the state governments with substantial funding coming from the central government. Almost 6,000 crores has been set aside by the center for this scheme. And the renewed version, the 2.0 edition, focuses on sustainable, responsible tourism development at the tourist sites in India. So there are sub-schemes present within Swadesh Darshan. One of them is the challenge-based destination development, where based on a certain infrastructural lacuna or based on certain developmental challenge, a tourist site is developed. Let's say in a tourist site, adequate roads are not available. So the challenge there would be to develop the roads, or a challenge-based destination is developed. Maybe in another tourist destination, there aren't enough hotels or there aren't enough tourist guides. So accordingly, a challenge-based destination approach will be followed under this sub-scheme, which is part of Swadesh Darshan itself. So right now, out of the 116 tourist sites which have been sanctioned, some of them are part of the second edition of Swadesh Darshan scheme. Some of them are part of challenge-based destination development, a sub-scheme under Swadesh Darshan. And there's another scheme called Special Assistance to States for Capital Investment, where states are given special support from the center for making capital investments to boost tourism and infrastructure, especially to build a tourist site on a global scale and attract foreign tourists as well. So under these three components, a total of 116 tourist sites have been sanctioned, and they will get substantial funding, and the states will eventually create the facilities, the infrastructure to develop these tourist sites. Next, gold has hit a massive rally in the last several weeks, and now it has hit a record price of $3,000 per pound. It has broken the historic records and reached an all-time high. So why is it happening, and why we are seeing that such a rise in gold prices? See, gold has always been seen as a safe haven, as a store of value of last resort against any vulnerability, be it a geopolitical crisis, a war, or inflation, or economic collapse. Against all these uncertainties, gold traditionally has been viewed as a buffer, as a safe haven, as a last store of value where you can protect your investments. That is the reason why central banks build upon their gold reserves. Investors as well accumulate gold bullions. So there is massive demand for gold as an investment resort, as a safe haven, especially in times of crisis. Now, recently, the ongoing wars and conflicts, the pandemic which happened a few years ago, they did cause a big disruption in the geopolitical space, in the economic space, leading to a surge in demand for gold. But the current demand, the rally that you're seeing right now, is primarily driven by the protectionist policies of Trump's administration. The threat of a tariff war, which Donald Trump has triggered, the erratic policies of threatening others with tariffs, imposing it and revoking it. This instability that Trump administration has triggered in the global economy and the protectionist tendency which has been triggered, it has scared investors. It has scared central banks and other countries, and they're all rushing towards gold. In the last few weeks, you see that central banks around the world have built up their gold reserves even further. Countries like China, which has been one of the largest buyers of gold, has stepped up its gold procurement as it is seen as a safe store of value. Even many big investors have been piling up on their gold reserves, leading to a shortage of supply, obviously leading to a significant jump in its prices. Now, can you tell me, where do you find the largest volume of gold to be present? Just answer this in the comment section. Is the largest volume of gold present in the hands of central banks or governments or investors or retail households? Let me know, where can you find the largest concentration of gold? In whose hands is the largest concentration of gold present? Let me know in the comments. Next, another economy related article. This development makes the finance minister very happy. Apart from collecting taxes from honest taxpayers, the government has received a windfall revenue, non-tax revenue, in the form of dividends from central public sector enterprises. So you may not get an appraisal, you may not get a hike, you may not get enough tax relief, but the government has been getting fresh revenue, and it's good news for the government as far as the government fiscal balance is concerned. The central public sector enterprises have generated a dividend of 66,000 crores, which is 10,000 crores than what it was estimated. If you look at the revised estimates, the government had anticipated maybe around 56,000 crores would be collected from the public sector companies as dividends. But now the actual collection has jumped by 10,000 crores, generating a windfall gain for the government of 66,000 crores. We still have a few more days left for the end of the fiscal, around 2 weeks. So estimates say government might collect another 1,000 crores in dividends. So by the end of this fiscal, government would have received 67,000 crores in dividends. And this is non-tax revenue. Please understand this. It's non-tax revenue for the government, which is a crucial component of revenue for the government. Clear? So public sector companies which perform well, eventually the dividends, because government happens to be the largest shareholder in the majority stakeholding PSUs, where government has the majority stake, and it receives plenty of dividends. See, otherwise government would have to divest, carry out a strategic disinvestment. There's a dedicated government department for that in the finance ministry, the DIPAM, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, which handles strategic investment, where especially minority stakes are sold to generate some revenue, non-tax revenue for the government. Now, government need not do that. It need not sell its shares. It can retain its shareholding, be it minority or majority shareholding, because the dividends received is a huge bumper for government's revenue. Next, the last article for today. On page 11, there's an article that makes a reference to UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, a very important UN organization. It has brought out an assessment of the global economy, the risks present in front of the global economy. According to this UNCTAD assessment, the biggest risk right now would be the protectionist policies that countries are coming out with. So it's again a reference to Trump's tariff wars and the controversial trade policies of the Trump administration, which is pushing every country to become more protectionist and bring out tariffs of their own, which will basically dismantle the globalized economy. It threatens to dismantle the trade mechanism created through WTO. It threatens to push the world back towards closed, isolated economies, and this could disrupt the current global supply chains. So UNCTAD has sent out a warning that in the coming days, there will be a lot of economic uncertainty if governments don't revoke their protectionist policies. So government policies and how businesses will react to it will determine the future of trade resilience, according to this report by UNCTAD. Now, what is important for us for prelims is the organization itself. UNCTAD is a very important organization. UPSC can ask questions. So this UN organization was established in 1964 by UN General Assembly as a permanent intergovernmental body. It is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and has 195 member states. It assists developing nations, least developed countries, to focus on trade and development. It promotes trade cooperation between UN members. It tries to stabilize the global trade and ensure that global trade will benefit all the countries. It will try to bring developed nations together with developing, underdeveloped nations. It also publishes important reports which provides crucial insights and data regarding global trade and development. Now, I'll give you one more exercise homework. Find out the popular reports that are published by UNCTAD. Mention that in the comments below. Which are the most important reports? Can you name 2 or 3 reports that are published by UNCTAD? So let's see how many of you can do this. And please note that inputs by UNCTAD is only advisory in nature. It's not binding in nature. It's only advisory. It works with UNGA, other organs of the UN, and various countries, developing nations, least developed countries, developed countries, to stabilize global trade and push global development. So on this note, I bring my detailed analysis to an end. I hope you guys are happy with the session. And if you liked it, do press the like button, share your comments, and do share the video with other aspirants as well. That is it for watching. Thanks for being here today. Let's meet tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.